Welcome to Unit 11 of the TESOL course at Southern Utah University. In this video, we'll be talking about teaching writing. We'll focus on the roles of the writing teacher. We'll look at a few different writing activities, and then we'll talk about the qualities or the practices of good writers. There are many different roles that a writing teacher can take on. One of them is the role of a motivator. Your goal is to encourage writers to get better. To develop good habits, to feel positive about their experience as a writer and their development as a writer. We should be encouraging them to take risks and to not feel upset about making mistakes. We should also be a facilitator. And so in this role, we need to learn how to match students to activities that fit their needs and their skill ability. We need to scaffold or break down complex tasks into manageable stages that they can do so that they can learn to develop those skills. We may want to think about how we're using class time. Do we start some activities in class and then have them finish at home, or are there certain types of writing activities they need to do in the classroom? Or we should be encouraging students to develop fluency and giving them lots of opportunities to practice writing. Writing teachers are also models, so they should show and model good writing processes and also good writing products. They should also use model papers or samples of writing in the classroom and teach students how to analyze this so that they can then learn from these examples. They model sort of that connection between reading and writing. We can notice things like grammar and vocabulary and structure by looking at model papers. Another good thing for teachers to do is to bring in benchmark papers that show different standards of ability within a particular genre or task, and say, here's a good quality one, here's one that's kind of middle quality, and here's one that's low quality, and help students recognize what's changing in those different examples that improves the quality of the writing. And then lastly, we can think of a writing teacher as an evaluator and a feedback provider. And as we talked about in the other video, we need to be sensitive in providing feedback. And we also need to think about what kind of feedback is valuable at what part of the process. Earlier in the writing process, let's give feedback on the macro skills, content and organization. But then once the learner gets closer to a final draft, let's give feedback on the micro skills, things like word choice and grammar and punctuation. If we give that kind of feedback too early, students are wasting time on things that might change as they make structural and content changes to their paper. So best to wait until the paper is ready to be polished and proofread. Another important role as being an evaluator is giving testing when necessary and making sure that tests are fair. And that if it's high stakes test, you're using multiple evaluators, at least double rating samples of writing, so that a teacher's personal bias isn't going to interfere with a student's success. As we talk about assessment, it's important to think about things like a rubric. So a rubric is a grading scheme, and there's different kinds of rubrics you can use. I just put in two examples here, but a holistic rubric is where you describe in general what a product looks like. And then there might be different levels. So here's what a level 4 looks like, here's what a level 3 and a level 2 and a level 1. But it's general, it's holistic, we say. An analytic rubric instead breaks something out into criteria. And so part of it might be ideas, another part might be grammar, another part might be presentation. And then there are descriptors for each criteria at all the different levels. Sometimes an analytic rubric is weighted so that certain criteria receive more points than other criteria. The example we see here is an unweighted one. Students will get points, but it's equal amounts of points can be earned in each category. Using rubrics is helpful, especially when paired with benchmarks, because then learners can see what's expected of them to achieve different levels of quality and what a sample paper looks like at that level of quality. Because no matter how good we write our rubric, there's going to be some ambiguity. But when we can see an example, that helps reduce that ambiguity for writers. Also, when we give feedback, we need to be thinking about should it be written or oral feedback. Lots of technology tools now make it very easy to give oral feedback to student writing. You can just record it and then share it with the student. You might also want to do a face-to-face or at least a video online conference with the student. Sometimes it's important to think, should I be telling the writer what to do, or should I be asking them questions? I often try to take the role as a reader when I give feedback. Not as someone who's trying to evaluate whether it's good or not, but as a reader who's trying to evaluate, can I understand the message? And then I can communicate that to the writer, saying, here's a place where I'm struggling to understand. What did you mean? And then we can talk about how they could alter what they've written to clarify that for the audience. This is also the approach I suggest to students when they do peer review. And some students really hate peer review. Part of the reason why peer review can be troubling for some students is because either they feel afraid to give their classmates feedback, or some classmates don't value the feedback that their peers give them, and so they're not really engaged in this process. But every time I go to do peer review with students, I tell them about a research study that a friend of mine from graduate school did. She had half of the students in the program do peer review. The other half did not do, so one half of the students received feedback on their papers from a teacher. The other half of students did not receive feedback from the teacher. During that same time, they were giving feedback on a sample student paper. So if we think about over the whole semester, one group of students is just getting feedback and the other group of students is just giving feedback. Who improved the most? Well, what my friend found is that the group that gave feedback improved the most. And the way she tried to explain this is that when we give feedback, we have to pay closer attention to what is good writing. We have to think about what we've been taught about the qualities of good writing, and then looking for evidence of that in a paper. When we receive feedback, lots of students didn't even incorporate that feedback, even though it was their very own paper. So this is how I justify peer review to my students. I say, even if you don't get great feedback from a peer, the action of looking at your peer's paper and giving them feedback actually helps you become a better writer, because now you're thinking more about what is a good work of writing, and then you take that experience and you end up applying it to your own paper. And so then that's what they can also teach them. You should be doing that also on your own with self-assessment. Essentially, peer review prepares you to become a better self-assessor. Let's talk about some different writing activities you could do in the classroom. So some of these activities are more micro skills focused. Things like copying text. So you're given a text, and whether it's an oral text that the teacher dictates or you look at a piece of text and you're copying it out, there's some value in doing that. You're learning to model the types of language that you're expected to learn. Another activity you might do is just ask students to write lists on certain topics, or lists of words with certain letter combinations or sound combinations. Just the fact of writing those lists out can help students learn vocabulary better. You might have a variety of different accuracy exercises. This might include things like doing editing, maybe for punctuation in a sentence, and learning the rules of capitalization or how to use commas correctly. Another way to do accuracy exercises is to tell students, here's a sentence that's written in one grammatical form, and I want you to write it in another one. For example, taking present tense and making it past, or taking active voice and making it passive voice. And those activities are certainly writing to learn. They're not intended to be communicating with someone else, but they're practicing writing in ways that is helpful for them. Close activities, these are fill-in-the-blank activities. We sort of talked a little bit about editing already, but you could give students a sentence or a paragraph that has problems and ask them to fix it. Peer communication is a great thing to do, whether it's getting an email pen pal or whether it's just doing live or chat, text chatting in class. I've had students do this before. They really liked it. They got on computers and they just got paired up with someone else in the classroom, and they found that really built their fluency skills. You could have them do writing from sources, like writing a report or an essay. You could do more creative writing, like poetry. Or you could have them do more self-expressive writing, like writing journals. Some teachers like to do what are called dialogue journals, where students write journal entries and the teacher occasionally collects them and responds back to students. And so there's this dialogue that goes back and forth between the teachers and the writers within the writer's journal. Let's talk finally about some qualities of good writers. And this comes from research at studying what kinds of things do good writers do. And these are good writers are defined as people who produce good works of writing. So good writers tend to read a lot. They read the kinds of texts that they're expected to produce, but they also read lots of other texts. So they're building their extensive reading skills, but they're also then improving as writers. They practice writing a lot outside of class. They look for opportunities, and sometimes this is writing a journal. A journal is a great way to just keep practicing writing in your fluency. Another thing that good writers do is they notice, they research information about, and they use new vocabulary. So they know how to use dictionaries. They know how to ask questions to understand how words are used, and then they start experimenting them with those words in their own writing. They plan when they write. They use a good writing process, and they outline things so that they, when they're going to write a complex piece of writing, they've already thought about how it should be organized to make the argument clear. They always review their writing before they share it with others. They go back and they review for grammar and content and make sure it works, or they go and visit a writing center and get a peer to help them make sure that it looks presentable. And they're self-motivated. They encourage themselves to continue practicing writing, and they like the idea of getting better at being writers. So in this video, we've talked about the different roles that a writing teacher can take and the different activities they can do with learners, and we've talked about what are the qualities that make learners good writers.